Hi folks, this is Jay. Hope you're okay today. It's good to see you. I just want to just do another video response to negation of P. He has done this video and he's worked quite hard on it, and the video that I made in response was from a discussion that we had quite some time on Skype, but he's made this video, he sent it me, but the video response that I made to the video was not actually studying the video, although I had seen the video before, but it was based on our discussion. So I'm just going to give more of a detailed response to negation of P, because this guy's worked hard on his video. Now I hope you don't mind me, negation of P, playing the whole video. I'll put a link to his video, and then you can see what he has to say. Okay, so let's just so it's an 8-minute video, but I am doing this, making explicit negation of P to engage with the video. So we'll play the video, and as we're playing it, so I hope you don't mind me playing the full video, so people can just get it in context, and I will link to your video. Okay, so let's see what he has to say.
The following thought experiment was developed to allow a person to analyze and determine if they truly believe in God. To be clear, this in no way is meant to disprove the existence of God. Most individuals, regardless of religious affiliation, should find the exercise somewhat fun and enlightening. However, in some cases, this newly found realization can be quite discomforting. So I urge you, please pause the video and ask yourself, how would you react if you were to discover that in fact you do not believe in God? If this understanding will cause you great mental anguish, I suggest that you stop the video at this time and perhaps readdress this argument at a later date when you're better prepared for that possibility. I thank you. Since you're still here, I assume you're willing to ask yourself some tough questions and are prepared to confront the answers, whatever they may be. I would like to thank you in advance for your time and honest participation. Keep in mind, the following questions are not rhetorical. You should answer every question, and if necessary, pause the video to give each issue as much attention as you feel is required. Also, please do your best to immerse yourself in the exercise. The more real world you make the thought experiment, the more reflective of your true beliefs the outcome will be. Okay, let's get started. I have found it best if you are the one to define your beliefs and your God. Remember, this is about you. The more honest you are, the better the results. Therefore, the terms should reflect your beliefs, not a set of values that are dictated by your church, unless, of course, those descriptions are what you truly believe. Question 1. Do you believe in most cases a person's recurring actions reflect their beliefs? An example of this may include the fact that people are reluctant to touch a stovetop burner that appears red. This is because over time they have learned the color red, at least in this context, indicates the burner is hot and potentially harmful. Interestingly, most people will hesitate to touch a burner that is red even after they have been informed that the burner is not hot, and the red coloration is due to it being painted or because of false lighting. This is because of the fact actions resulting from one's ingrained beliefs are difficult to overcome. Question 2. Is God omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and or omnibenevolent? In layman's terms, what I'm asking is God all-knowing, all-seeing, all-loving, and or all-powerful? Question 3. Do you believe God is the most significant sentient being in your life? To clarify, would you agree that even though you may truly love other human beings, you should put God before all others? Question 4. Do you believe the most important relationship of your life is the one you cultivate with God? Again, do you feel it's true that although you may want and even feel you need relationships while here on earth, your relationship with God is paramount to your overall well-being? Now that you have reacquainted and perhaps reestablished your foundation of basic beliefs and the characteristics of God, we can begin the thought experiment. Begin by envisioning a living person who you currently have a good relationship with. Most importantly, you wish to continue and or improve that bond by maintaining and developing their perception of you as both moral and ethical. Now, this person need not be an authority figure. Examples might include a spouse, parents, friends, or even a child. The important aspect of this individual is they consider you to be a good person, and you wish to maintain that status. Now I'd like you to picture yourself performing an act, better yet, let's make that a sin, that you have done in the past, and that if found out, could jeopardize how this individual views you. Now, the act does not have to be an evil act, just a sin that, if discovered, could negatively impact your image. Something like lying, stealing, or even something as benign as masturbating will do just fine. You got it? Okay, let's move on. Now I'm going to turn up the heat on you a little. Imagine that individual becomes aware of what you're doing. Would you stop what you're doing, or would you continue the act? To be clear, you are aware that they're witnessing the sin, and they realize what you're doing. Would you stop? Now let's back up a step. Imagine that this person was aware of what you were planning to do before you actually did it. Now remember, you have not begun the act, but as before, they have full understanding of what you are about to do. Would, or even could, you begin to perform the act with them present and aware of what was about to happen? In other words, would/could you start to masturbate, lie, or steal in front of that person that you love and desire the respect from? Okay, buckle up. This is where things get interesting. Given the attributes and the import you conferred to your God, I would like you to explain why you are willing and able to perform these sins with your God present, while at the same time you're unwilling and even perhaps unable to commit the same sin in the presence of a human being. While that sinks in and you contemplate your answers, let me save us both some time by addressing the most frequent responses. The answer I get most often is that I can sin because God will forgive me. This response totally misses the point of the exercise. I'm quite sure the person you have in mind may forgive you as well. This does not change the fact that you will not commit that sin when they are aware of what you're doing. Again, the point of the exercise is to highlight the discontinuity between what you say you believe and how you act on a daily basis. The next most common assertion is that we're not perfect, and we all commit sinful acts. I must disagree, at least in part. Now let me explain. I assume you have not continued and or started an act that was unethical or shameful in front of a loved one that was aware of what you were doing. Now, to put it bluntly, have you masturbated in front of your parents and then went on to claim, well, no one's perfect, we all sin? Of course you haven't. In short, what this demonstrates that you are perfect, at least regarding that act, in front of human beings. You're just not perfect in front of God. In closing, I realize this argument takes time for most people to comprehend, and it can be difficult to admit that your own actions will not only lead others to conclude that you do not believe in God, but it may in fact force you to reassess your faith as well. I hope this was at least interesting and welcome your comments below. Please rate and favorite as you see fit. Also, I, along with Live Life 8072, hold a weekly blog TV show called The Skeptic Fence. I would like to invite you to stop by and view what we do. We welcome people of all faiths and encourage everyone to call in during the question and answer portion of the show. We broadcast every Saturday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern. Links in the description. We hope to see you there, and
There
thanks
we
again
are.
for watching.
I would not recommend you to go to the show to talk to Negation of P yet, but I would not recommend you to go to Live Life show. I wouldn't trust Live Life. Just saying it as it is. So there we are. That's Negation of P's video. Basically, I did make a response, and looking at his video again, I think my first video is a good response to what Negation has to say in this video. And let's just come back again. First of all, this is a thought experiment. So basically, it has no objective validity. I come back to that again. It's not some kind of scientific experiment that we can do and we can say this is some kind of objective fact. It all works on the basis and takes for granted that you're going to agree with all the steps that Negation of P presents before you. So that's the first point. The second point is, so it's not objective information, objective facts that we're dealing with, which is quite surprising considering atheists regard themselves as rational and objective. So we're presented with a scenario that is just purely a straw man set up by Negation of P to try and get you to doubt your belief in God, because it's showing that in reality, or what he's trying to get to show is that in reality, on a day-to-day basis, really your actions are showing that you don't believe in God. That's what he's hoping to try and illustrate. But there's no objective validity in this. We're not dealing with evidence, objective facts, objective information in any shape or form, which is quite surprising coming from atheists who kind of regard themselves as the great objective reasonable beings that they think they are. So that's the first point. The second point with this is the language that Negation of P is using is he's coming across as if he's letting you come up with the conclusion, with the reasoning process. He is giving you the power to think through these issues, but obviously it's not a case of him empowering you. It's a case of he's an atheist and he has an agenda, and you have an agenda, Negation of P, and your agenda is to show that Christianity isn't true. And even though you said that the point of this video is not to show that there is no God, but to show that you don't believe in God in your actions, is not really being intellectually honest. You are an atheist. The reason why you're making the video is so that you can show people that there is no evidence for God, and you're hoping to do this by getting the person themselves to realize in the end that they don't actually believe in God. Okay, so in other words, you know, you do have an agenda with this video. It's not kind of sweetness and light, setting up a thought something to get people to think about, and you're kind of like this saint who's coming along providing us with this opportunity to think. You have a particular agenda. So that's the second thing. The third thing is you talk about, think about the God, you said think about the God who you want to think about and believe, so long as it's your beliefs. But then in the video you mention that the character of God, that is omnipresent, etc. In this thought experiment, you can't really begin, and I'll say this again, you can't really begin to expose Christianity, critique Christianity, unless you deal with Christianity's theology, okay? And you mentioned three attributes of God. There is the attribute of God's justice, there is the attribute of God's mercy, there is the attribute of God's holiness, there is the attribute of God's perfection, and there is the that is the doctrine of God, and God is a Trinitarian God, God of relationships, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. In other words, your video is just concentrating on particular attributes of God for your scenario to set up. And if you concentrate on other aspects of God's attributes, such as, for example, that God is merciful, that when you come to the end and say you would not sin in front of your friend or your family member or whatever, well, if you contemplate that God is merciful, then it requires that some mercy has to be shown. So it means that we cannot be perfect. If God is merciful, it means He has to show mercy. So the implication is that we are not perfect. Alright? God is perfect. The implication being that we're not perfect. God is just. The implication being there has to be justice. If there has to be justice, it means that we are not perfect. We are going to make unjust actions. So just reasoning from the character of God, the whole scenario of the character of God, implies that this false scenario that you concoct at the end of the reasoning process doesn't work with the full character of God. So, and that comes back to this issue of, again, this is principally the main argument really as well, is if you're going to deal with any particular view, whether it be communism, atheism, or whether it be Christianity or whatever, you've got to critique that position on its own terms. So for example, I have and do regularly read atheist material. I listen to Dawkins, I listen to Sam Harris and debates by Hitchens, and I listen to them all the time and I read them all the time, and so I respond to those, what I read from atheists and their literature and their thinking. And if you're going to critique Christianity, you've got to look at what Christian theology is and critique it, rather than set up a thought process that has nothing to do with the way Christianity presents itself. I mean, the key issue about Christianity is the resurrection of Christ. That Christ says Christ rose from the dead in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, written around about AD 54, is an early attestation of the resurrection of Christ. We have outer sources, extra biblical sources outside, that refer to the life of Christ, showing he was a historical figure, such as Pliny, Tacitus, Josephus, etc. Even if you argue the passage in Josephus which mentions about the life of Jesus Christ, even if you said it was doctored by some Christian import there, most scholars would agree there is some kind of structure about the life of Christ within Josephus. So we have these extra biblical accounts. We have this early account of Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. We have the Gospels, and whether you agree that they're first century documents or not, we have these sources and we have to grapple with them and say, well, are these giving us a true account of the life and death of Jesus Christ? And if we say that the disciples saw Jesus Christ as from an illusionary perspective, then the problem with that is people who see illusions, it's all different people in at different times, at different contexts. And when people see illusions, that's not the case. It's often maybe a couple of people, and it's in one context. You don't get such a variety as you do in the early accounts of the Gospels. So, the illusion theory is not applicable to the resurrection of Christ. Secondly, the issue of that he didn't die on a cross. We know scientifically that if you get crucified, you will most certainly die from such an experience. So that's not a tenable excuse that he might have died, that he might not have died on the cross. The other issue is someone might have snatched the body away, but if they'd have snatched the body away, why didn't they, the Jewish authorities or the Roman authorities, show the bodies when the Christian preachers were preaching? Why didn't they show the body? Because they didn't have a body. So whatever explanation you get, it doesn't explain the life, death and resurrection of Christ. The only best thing that covers all the facts is that Christ did die and he did rise again. How does one explain a church that had given up, was hopeless, had packed it in and thought that their faith was completely destroyed when Christ died? They thought it was all over and they had no boldness and they were hopeless, and then suddenly they're bold, they're preaching, and they're willing to die for their faith. The only explanation we can come up with is that Christ did actually die from the cross, die and rise again. You might say, well, Jason, miracles don't happen, that's so it just couldn't have happened, but you come back to the issue of probability. Since the time of David Hume, there have been issues concerning that we don't know what contingent acts are actually happening. That in an action, whatever action it is, there are in a contingent action, we don't know how an action works at the deep structural atomic level. We don't know how they connect. So because of this skepticism about knowledge dating back from David Hume, we came up with probability in the issue of science. That means we have a scale, a grade as to what a scientific theory is in terms of probability: good probability, not so good probability, etc. The reason why science has done that is because it's much more humbler, because it knows that whatever contingent issue or effect that we look at, always something could come up that will upset the apple cart. Something could. And so there's an allowance for that. And what that means is there is a possibility that events can come into our time zone that our contingent observations have not spotted. And so we're open-minded, and science is open-minded to the possibility that we don't know everything in any contingent act. And what that means is when we're looking at an event in history, something could have broken into a contingent event in history that we never really computed in our way of thinking. And you know, the idea that a miracle is going against nature is a bad definition, because a miracle can actually, or could actually, be working with nature at a deeper structure that we've never really observed or understand. So, in other words, this argument that miracles don't happen is not really a feasible argument. What we have to do is examine the phenomena before us. That's all we can do. We can't push it out on any scientific or philosophical grounds. So, what I'm saying is, issues such as the resurrection of Christ are key evidences for the Christian faith, and it's no good setting up these psychological scenarios trying to make people feel that they don't believe in God, when actually the main grand evidences of the Christian faith you're not actually dealing with. You're being anti-intellectual and you're avoiding the main intellectual challenges of our time. And I ought to remind you, as John Stuart Mill, the utilitarian philosopher, who said that, not exact words, but Jesus Christ was the most central figure in history. And you know, you've got to face this fact, negation of P, that Christ has had the most impact in history, and you have to be willing to investigate, think about him, and be challenged by him. And your thought program completely avoids this and is revealing itself to be anti-intellectual. So that's a main consideration. The issue of you wouldn't sin in front of somebody, family or friend, but you would in front of God, so therefore you're not, you don't really believe in God. Again, fails in terms of theology. We are not perfect. You've sent this in your video, but it's actually the case. We are not perfect. Secondly, it fails to take into consideration that some people can be evil. It plays on the assumption that it actually shows that you believe Christians are good people, because you're assuming that they will do the right thing, which is quite interesting. But what if people are really bad and would actually do evil things in front of the people who they so-called love? How does your scenario work then? It doesn't. Alright, it all hangs on the fact that you presume and you hope that the person's a good person and will be honest and good. So you can't get to your thought program unless you get a good person, which is interesting. And isn't it the fact that you're isn't it the fact, so someone's ringing there, isn't it the fact that sorry about this, it's just the phone's ringing. Isn't it the fact that you as atheists have a problem with the is ought? So how you can be talking about morality and presuming that people are going to be good when you haven't sorted out the is ought problem, how you can get morality from nature when nature says nothing about it. David Hume and Wittgenstein have mentioned this. So you've got massive holes on your own system about morality. You can't get morality from an atheist materialist position that tries to develop it from nature. So it's a bit contradictory presuming that people can be good when you don't really have a definition of goodness, because you can't get it from nature. Those just a little knotty intellectual problems that you need to sort out. What else is there? The issue about sin as well. The fact of the matter is that in reality, in the real world, we are not before a loved one all the time. There are many times when we go to bed and we're alone, or there are many times when we're alone, or many times we're away from our loved ones. And your scenario is a kind of make-believe kind of world. In actual reality, the reality of everyday life, the fact is that we are not before our loved ones all the time. So if you're a young person and you have a mother and father, you're with your mother and father during the afternoon or a Saturday, but Saturday evening you go out with your mates, they want to go and watch porn or go and take drugs, and you're not with your parents, so that you go off and you get influenced by your mates and you might watch a bit of porn, because the reality is that you're not living before your loved one all the time, your parents. It's the same with your wife or your husband, etc. So your scenario fails to consider the actual reality of everyday life, and that's perhaps one of the big problems with your scenario. Rather than actually deal with reality, what the real problems are, social problems, economic problems, relational problems, and trying to see which belief fits reality. How can two people, say a man and a woman who are struggling in their marriage, how can they get their marriage on the right track? Well, Christianity talks about forgiveness, it talks about humility, it talks about love. So it helps, it fits reality in that situation. How do you bring up your children? How do you help in society? The Bible, Christianity deals with these issues in concrete reality. Your scenario is hairy-fairy, make-believe kind of scenario. Just doesn't work in reality. Coupled with the video that I made before, I think I've made a fair, honest crack at some of the issues of your video. I think rather than coming up with thought experiments, you need to engage with Christianity. For example, negation of P. Have you ever read N.T. Wright? Have you ever read anything of N.T. Wright? You cannot even begin to critique the life of Christ unless you've begun to read N.T. Wright. Have you ever read anything or studied anything by Dr. Al Muller? He's another Christian theologian, thinker, who's written a lot philosophically and ethically. You know, it'd be better if you took some of these scholars and their arguments and how they present Christian faith and critique them, rather than coming up with these strawman arguments, scenarios that you set up, that people who are gullible, who are not trained to think these issues out, and not trained to realise the kind of agendas that you atheists have, where you're not objective and you're not as open-minded as you present yourself to be. It'd be much better to engage in Christian scholarship and help people to think these issues through, rather than to trick people in these kind of scenarios that you've set up. Those are my thoughts on negation of P. I'm willing to come and chat with you live if you want me to chat with you and answer some of these thoughts that I've said. But yeah, have a read of N.T. Wright and see what you think of him concerning the historical Christ, and you'll be amazed at the new research that's been done in first century Judaism and what this is telling us about the life of Christ. Thank you, take care, and God bless you to everybody.